flavor. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this one. Miguel Berchelt had this to say. He says he wants Ito versus Herring winner next. He was quoted as saying, "I want to prove that I'm the best 130-pounder in the world. It will be Jamel Herring taking on the WBO champion Masayuki Ito. I want the winner of that fight because I don't want to leave any doubt as to who the best super featherweight in the world is." Now, whether you go by BoxRec's division-by-division rankings, whether you go by BoxRec, Ring Magazine, ESPN, or Transnational, no matter where you look, Miguel Berchelt is the consensus #1 ranked 130-pound fighter in the entire weight class. So in some ways, he is already recognized
as the best
guy in that division, at least by the powers that be. But it appears that Miguel Berchelt wants to put a stamp on it. He wants to unify world titles by taking on the winner of Ito versus Herring. A fight that's scheduled to be going down 2 weeks from now, which you can catch on ESPN. The winner of that fight will effectively become or remain the reigning WBO champion, in which case Miguel Berchelt seems to have the winner of that fight in his crosshairs, and I applaud him for it. I applaud him for it because, well, this is probably the only unification fight the 130-pound division is going to give us. Let me tell you something. In a lot of ways, it feels like the moment Vasyl Lomachenko left the 130-pound division, the moment he left the weight class, he took all the excitement with him, and now everybody's got their eyes fixed on 135. And that's saying a lot because 130 pounds, that division, that weight class, it's got no shortage of talent. There are good fighters there and good fights to be made there. Tevin Farmer tried to make it happen. He tried to make it happen with Gervonta Davis, but to no avail. And those kinds of fights not happening make people stop watching, make people stop paying attention. When the biggest news coming out of the weight class is Gervonta Davis's latest stupid tweet, people stop caring. I mean, all jokes aside, how do you expect people to tune in and just care about the weight class overall when the most that's going on are Twitter wars between Gervonta Davis and fighters that he has no intention of fighting?
Seriously.
Those things in mind, Miguel Berchelt targeting one of the other champions in the weight class, the winner of Masayuki Ito, who's the reigning WBO champion, versus Jamel Herring, who is the challenger. Berchelt targeting that guy is a step in the right direction. If you're going to get yourself any kind of attention, these are the kinds of fights that you've got to have. You've got to give the boxing fans a statement that lends itself to catharsis, because at this point in the juncture, you got 4 world champions in the same weight class. And while Miguel Berchelt might be ranked as #1 among them,
and he is,
nothing puts a stamp on it more. Nothing puts a stamp on being #1 better than taking out 1 or 2 or 3 of the other champions at the weight. I mean, that's really how you adequately convey that message to the boxing fans, that you are, in fact, the best in show. Now, I think that Miguel Berchelt facing the winner of that fight, I think that's an entirely doable fight. I don't think we're far away from that fight at all. I very much believe that Top Rank will make that fight.
Yeah, I think so.
They've pretty much got a lock on anything going on from 130 to 135 pounds. Those things in mind.
I think they're going to make it.
Because in regards to Berchelt facing the winner of that fight, there are no cross-promotional or cross-network issues to have to overcome. It's an entirely doable fight that they can make amongst themselves. I mean, 9 times out of 10, that's what holds up a fight. Cross-promotional or cross-network issues. Well, in this case, between this champion and what could be that champion, in this case, well, that's not a problem. They don't have to overcome any of that shit. That's not an obstacle. That's not an issue. Thus, I think Top Rank will make it. You know, Miguel Berchelt's rematch with Francisco Vargas this weekend, it was the main event. But there weren't a lot of rumblings about that fight. You understand that in spite of Miguel Berchelt being the consensus #1 of the weight class and having a very respectable resume with 2 wins over fighters like Francisco Vargas, a win over Mickey Roman in what was a very entertaining fight, and a win over Takeshi Miura, Miguel Berchelt has the substance in his resume to qualify him as what is the #1 guy at the weight. The substance is there, but the excitement
is what's missing.
That's really what's missing. That's the missing component. And a unification fight is just what the doctor ordered. I mean, that's what people really want to see. It's a cliche. It's something you get tired of hearing, but it's still the truth nonetheless. People want to see the best versus the best. They want to see champions versus champions. In a division where there are 4 world champions, it stands to reason that at least 2 of these fucking guys fight each other to decide who really is the best in show. So, I'm hoping that Top Rank makes this in a timely fashion. I'm hoping that this is the next fight we see Miguel Berchelt in, because Miguel Berchelt also seems to have aspirations of squaring off against Vasyl Lomachenko. Vasyl Lomachenko, who left the 130-pound division approximately 3 fights ago. So if this is a fight that Miguel Berchelt is considering for the near future, what that indicates is that he's considering leaving the weight class. And I would hate to see him leave the weight class without having unified a title first, without having squared off against one of the other champions that are there, because for the duration of Miguel Berchelt's reign as the WBC champion, there have been several other world champions to choose from. World titles have changed hands. Different guys are holding different belts. The WBA went from Jezreel Corrales to Gervonta Davis for some fucking reason. The IBF went from Gervonta Davis to Tevin Farmer. The WBO went from Vasyl Lomachenko to Masayuki Ito. There have always been a pool of options there for Miguel Berchelt, and while some options are more feasible than others, it would be rather ignominious to see a champion like Miguel Berchelt leave the weight class having not unified a world title first. Something that you can almost equate to Zurdo Ramirez's reign in the super middleweight division. That he had a solid reign, he fought some good fighters, but he never unified. So his reign as a champion went largely unnoticed, largely uneventful. I mean, he has since vacated the WBO title that he held at 168 pounds. That title is now going to be on the line in Billy Joe Saunders' upcoming fight with Isufi. And when you reflect on Zurdo's reign, it's not that Zurdo's not a good fighter, and it's not that he never fought any other good fighters. It's just that you wanted to see him test his mettle against the other world champions. And the same applies here with Miguel Berchelt, because for the duration of his reign, there have been several different world champions holding several different world titles. So I'm hoping that this fight between Miguel Berchelt and the winner of Ito versus Herring gets made in a timely fashion. Now on to another potential fight that we could be looking at in the near future. There are preliminary rumblings of what could be advanced talks that are already in the final stages, for a fight between Mikey Garcia and Danny Garcia. And get a load of this. This proposed fight that could be going down as soon as August is being discussed as a PBC on Fox pay-per-view. Now, before I even get into what I think about that fight overall, before I even get into that,
there's something to be addressed.
I think this revelation, this breaking news, I think this effectively answers the question as far as who really sold that Mikey Garcia versus Errol Spence pay-per-view. It being that Errol Spence's next fight, we already know what it's going to be and who it's going to be against. And that fight is not a pay-per-view. That's going to be on regular Fox. Whereas Mikey Garcia is the guy who's going to be participating in a pay-per-view in his next fight. Having come off a loss
to Spence,
the powers that be have decided that they feel confident enough that they can put him in yet another pay-per-view against another welterweight.
Supposedly.
Those things in mind, the question then becomes, after the smoke settled in the Mikey Garcia versus Errol Spence pay-per-view, which one of the two actually walked away from that fight a pay-per-view attraction? Which one of those guys actually is the draw? The one who helped sell that fight, the one who carried that fight.
And crossed over.
Because if these rumors check out, and Mikey Garcia's next fight is a pay-per-view, if this story sticks, if the story checks out, if it happens that way and Mikey's next fight is a pay-per-view, and Errol Spence's fight isn't, then that answers the question, doesn't it? That answers the question as far as, one, who helped sell that fight? Who really sold that Spence fight with Mikey? Who was really the draw in that fight? It answers that question, and it also answers which one of those two guys walked away the draw, the pay-per-view attraction. I'll tell you, it's funny because we know how the fight worked out. We know who won the fight. It was Errol. It was Spence that won the fight, but it seems that winning that fight didn't actually do anything for his marquee value. It didn't do anything for his stock. Because having won that fight, well, Errol Spence is back to fighting on regular TV for his next fight. He's back to fighting on regular TV, where it's Mikey Garcia that is going on to participate in what could be another pay-per-view. I say could be because this is the sport of boxing, ladies and gentlemen. The sport of boxing and the news that revolves around it is fluid. It could change at any given moment. But if the story does check out, and Mikey's upcoming fight with what is supposed to be Danny Garcia, if his upcoming fight really is a pay-per-view, then we see who the real draw was. We see who the real marquee fighter was in that fight. We see that it was Mikey, not Errol. that carried that pay-per-view. That if there were a lot of people in attendance in the arena, and there were a lot of people at home that decided to buy the thing, something to the tune of 360,000 to 400,000 people, that if all of that took place, those numbers are attributed to people who wanted to support Mikey, not people who were high on Errol. And there's a lot to be addressed there, because a lot of Errol Spence's supporters, his fans, they like to justify him having fought a fucking lightweight on the premise that he was trying to raise his marquee value. Well, if that's what he was trying to do, it doesn't look like it worked, because his next fight is on regular TV, and Mikey's fight is the fight that might be a pay-per-view. Think about it this way. Errol Spence's fight with Sean Porter is a better fight than Mikey's fight with Danny. It's a better fight. It's a fight between two world champions. It's a higher caliber, higher quality fight that has more potential to be a competitive match. Whereas Mikey's fight with Danny, there's no world title on the line in that fight. Neither one of those two guys are champions. But that might be the fight that they charge you to see. Because to the powers that be, at least it appears that way, at least based on these rumblings, to the powers that be, Mikey is the marquee fighter, not Errol. And that revelation, that recent revelation, directly counteracts the agenda, the narrative that some people out there in the YouTube boxing community were trying to push. That Errol Spence is all of a sudden this pay-per-view attraction, this A-side fighter. No, not quite. Not yet. Doesn't seem that way. That if anybody walked away from that fight with their marquee value having been raised, it was Mikey, not Errol. Because the powers that be, if this story checks out, that's saying that Mikey off a loss is worth more marquee value than Errol off a win. Rightfully so, because I don't know why they would think that people are stupid enough to buy into this smokescreen that Errol Spence dominating a lightweight is somehow some big testament to skill, some big testament to how good of a fighter he is, when he wasn't the one that was taking the risks. It was Mikey that was taking the risks. So Errol going in there and dominating is simply something that he's supposed to be able to do. You're supposed to be able to do that. And you doing that doesn't fool anybody. It doesn't communicate anything. It doesn't raise your marquee value. Now, perhaps, a stellar performance against Sean Porter might lend itself to that. Perhaps a performance over him and defeating him will do for Errol what they thought beating Mikey would do. Now, in regards to Mikey Garcia and what could be a potential fight with Danny Garcia,
that's a story.
At 147 pounds, presumably, it appears that the PBC is ready, willing, and able to whore Mikey Garcia to their welterweight stable to keep everything in-house and avoid certain situations.
As always.
They don't have any ponies in the show at 135 for Mikey Garcia to fight. And don't look to those guys to try to have to work with Top Rank to make that Lomachenko fight. They have no intention of making that fight. I mean, if you can't read between the lines and see that yet, then I don't know what the fuck to tell you. All I can say is you must have boxing cataracts. Because if they had any intention of making that fight, then there wouldn't be rumblings right now of Mikey Garcia fighting at 147 for no fucking belt. You know, Mikey said he wants to become a world champion in a 5th weight class. But those things in mind, even if that's true, well, this is not going to win you a belt. And you're not going to tell me that this fight with Danny Garcia is worth more commercial value than a Lomachenko fight.
Nah.
A Lomachenko fight would likely drum up more business because people would view that as a pay-per-view worthy fight. Whereas a Danny Garcia fight, there's some intrigue. There are some selling points. You could always bill it as a Mexico versus Puerto Rico kind of fight. You know, those kinds of fights, they do normally get a lot of attention. Kind of like Canelo versus Cotto. But better still, this is not a world championship fight because there is no world title.
There isn't.
And the fact that the PBC doesn't want to work with anybody, they want to operate like an island. They want to keep everything in-house. Well, they don't have any ponies in the show at 135 for Mikey Garcia to fight. Everything at 140 is a mixed bag, and most of the who's who guys, they're all booked up. You know, there are talks that Hooker could be facing Jose Ramirez. WBO champion Maurice Hooker, he could be facing WBC champion Jose Ramirez. The other guys, they're all wrapped up in the World Boxing Super Series. So that doesn't leave any notariable opponents for Mikey Garcia to fight at 140. That just leaves 147. 147, where a good amount of the talent is on the PBC side of the street. And it appears what the PBC are doing now is whoring Mikey Garcia to their welterweight stable, using him and what supporters he has, what supporters he may have left, to try to turn over a profit in the pay-per-view market. Now that in and of itself poses certain questions. Because while Mikey Garcia might have been the main selling point in the Spence fight, and while they might have been relying on his fans to carry that fight, to carry it at the gate, to carry it in the pay-per-view market, while that might have been the case in that fight, given how Mikey performed in that fight, that he didn't go out there and do anything, he didn't do nothing, he just went out there and tried to survive. Given those things, and those things in mind, how many people can they get to buy this fight? To see Mikey Garcia continue to campaign as a welterweight, given how he looked in his last fight, that it wasn't entertaining. All he did was go out there and try to survive. Oh, I realize that the bigwigs over there at the PBC may be thinking to themselves, hey, look at how many pay-per-views we sold on the back of Mikey Garcia's fans. Let's try to do it again. Let's go for 2. Let's see if we can do another one. That from where they're sitting, they look at Mikey Garcia as what could be a potential pay-per-view attraction because they attribute the success of the first pay-per-view to him. So that's why they've decided to put him in another one. That may be the logic from where they are sitting, but from where we, the fans, are sitting, particular to anyone who actually bought that fight between Mikey and Spence, particular to those guys, they may be thinking, I don't want to, I don't want to pay to see Mikey in another welterweight contest because I see how he looked. He looked like shit. He didn't fucking do nothing. I've seen fights that weren't pay-per-views that were better than this one. So I'm not forking over $75 for what could be another mismatch. On one end, you have the potential of billing it as a Puerto Rico versus Mexico kind of fight. And those kinds of fights, traditionally, they do garner a lot of interest. But on the other end of the spectrum, Mikey's very last fight, his very last performance was a performance where he didn't fucking do nothing. So how many people are willing to pay to see something like that again? And, Danny Garcia, in regards to the Puerto Rican fans, he doesn't have the command over the Puerto Rican fans that a Miguel Cotto or a Felix Trinidad had. Hell, I don't even think he has the command over the Puerto Rican fans that Mikey has over the Mexican fans. I don't think they're on equal footing in that department either. So while it could be billed as a Puerto Rico versus Mexico kind of fight, it's questionable just how much business could it actually do. I'll tell you that there are a lot of inferences you can make in regards to the PBC, in regards to Mikey and Danny and what they intend to do and what's really going on behind the scenes. I'll tell you that there are a lot of inferences you can make based on this recent revelation. But at minimum, what it communicates to me is what I've been telling you. Don't hold your fucking breath waiting for Mikey to fight Loma or for Danny to fight Crawford.